Hey people, it's Niles talking. Now this is from CNBC, and this is a very important thing. This begins, you can't sue Pfizer or Moderna if you have severe COVID vaccine side effects. The government likely won't compensate you for damages either. Key points, under the PrEP Act, companies like Pfizer and Moderna have total immunity from liability if something unintentionally goes wrong with their vaccines. A little-known government program provides benefits to people who can prove they suffer serious injury from a vaccine. That program rarely pays, covering just 29 claims over the last decade. Now, a previous source said that was 6%. If you experience severe side effects after getting a COVID vaccine, lawyers tell CNBC there's basically no one to blame in a U.S. court of law. The federal government has granted companies like Pfizer and Moderna immunity from liability if something unintentionally goes wrong with their vaccines. It is very, very rare for a blanket immunity law to be passed, said Dr. Raj Dunn, a Dallas labor and employment attorney. Pharmaceutical companies typically aren't offered much liability protection under the law. You also can't sue the Food and Drug Administration for authorizing a vaccine for emergency use, nor can you hold your employer accountable if they mandate inoculation as a condition of employment. So if you die from any of this, no one's responsible. Congress created a fund specifically to help cover lost wages and out-of-pocket medical expenses for people who have been irreparably harmed by a covered countermeasure such as a vaccine. But it is difficult to use and rarely pays. Attorneys say it has compensated less than 6% of the claims filed in the last decade. In February, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar invoked the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. The 2005 law empowers the HHS Secretary to provide legal protection to companies making or distributing critical medical supplies such as vaccines and treatments unless there's willful misconduct by the company, which will never be proven in a court of law because the government is paid for by the vaccine companies. The protection lasts until 2024. That means that for the next 4 years, these companies cannot be sued for money damages in court over injuries related to the administration or use of products to treat or protect against COVID. HSS declined CNBC's request for an interview. Dunn thinks a big reason for the unprecedented protection has to do with the expedited timeline. When the government said we want you to develop this 4 or 5 times faster than you normally do, most likely the manufacturer said to the government, we want you, the government, to protect us from multi-million-dollar lawsuits, said Dunn. Also, for those who don't know, Reagan signed a bill in 1986 giving immunity to pharmaceutical companies. This goes way back. It is the quickest vaccine ever developed was for mumps. It took 4 years and was licensed in 1967. And for all those people saying, "Oh, it's safe," the fastest vaccine produced ever took 4 years. This has taken hardly one. Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine was developed and cleared for emergency use in 8 months. Wow, that's a fact that has fueled public mistrust of the coronavirus inoculation in the US. Roughly 4 in 10 Americans say would definitely or probably not get vaccinated, according to a recent survey by Pew Research Center. While this is lower than it was 2 months ago, it still points to a huge trust gap. Well, at least 4 out of 10 Americans isn't retarded. That's a good sign, but not good enough. But drug makers like Pfizer continue to reassure the public no shortcuts were taken. How can there not be when you did it in less than a quarter of the time? This is a vaccine that was developed without cutting corners, CEO Dr. Albert Furler said in an interview with CNBC's Squawk Box on Monday. This is a vaccine that is getting approved by all authorities in the world. That should say something. I want to remind people, if 100 people believe something is true, it does not make it true. Belief does not equal truth. The legal immunity granted to pharmaceutical companies doesn't just guard them against lawsuits. Dunn said it helps lower the cost of the immunizations. The government doesn't want people suing the companies making the COVID vaccine, because then the manufacturers will probably charge the government a higher price per person per dose. Pfizer and Moderna did not return CNBC's request for comment on their legal protections. Is anyone liable? Remember, vaccine manufacturers aren't the ones approving their product for mass distribution. That is the job of the FDA, which begs the question, can you sue the US government if you have an extraordinary bad reaction to a vaccine? Again, the answer is no. You can't sue the FDA for approving or disapproving a drug, said Dorit Rees, a professor at the University of California, Hastings College of Law. That's part of its sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity came from the king, explains Dunn, referring to British law before the American Revolution. You couldn't sue the king, so America has sovereign immunity, and even each state has sovereign immunity. There are limited exemptions, but Dunn said he doesn't think they provide a viable legal path to hold the federal government responsible for a COVID vaccine injury. Bringing workers back to the office in a post-COVID world also carries with it a heightened fear of liability for employers. Lawyers across the country say their corporate clients are reaching out to them asking whether they can require employees to get immunized. Those clients who run businesses serving customers in person or on site are most interested in mandating a vaccine for staff. They view it as a selling point. It's particularly important for restaurants, bars, gyms, and salons. My clients in that segment of the service industry are looking hard at making it mandatory as a sales point to their customers. While this is in part a public relations tactic, it's legally within an employer's right to impose such a requirement. Requiring a vaccine is a health and safety work rule, and employers can do that, said Race. There are a few notable exceptions. If a workforce is unionized, the collective bargaining agreement may require negotiating with the union before mandating a vaccine. Anti-discrimination laws provide some protections as well. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, workers who don't want to be vaccinated for medical reasons are eligible to request an exemption. If taking the vaccine is a violation of a sincerely held religious belief, Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 will potentially provide a way to opt out. Should none of these exemptions apply, employees may have some legal recourse if they suffer debilitating side effects following a work-mandated COVID inoculation. Attorneys say claims would most likely be routed through workers' compensation programs and treated as an on-the-job injury, but there are significant limits or caps on the damages an employee can recover, said Dunn. He added that it would likely be difficult to prove. Mandatory vaccination protocols, however, may not happen until the FDA formally approves the vaccines and grants Pfizer and BioNTech or Moderna a license to sell them, which will take several more months of data to show their safety and effectiveness. An emergency use authorization is not a license, said Rees. There's a legal question as to whether you can mandate an emergency observation. The language in the Act is somewhat unclear on that. The government has created a way for people to recover some damages should something go wrong following immunizations. In addition to legal immunity, the PrEP Act established the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program, CICP, which provides benefits to eligible individuals who suffer serious injury from one of the protected companies. The little-known government program has been around for a decade and is managed by an agency under HHS. This fund typically only deals with vaccines you probably would never get, like the H1N1 and anthrax vaccines. If a case for compensation through the CICP is successful, the program provides up to $50,000 per year in unreimbursed lost wages and out-of-pocket medical expenses. It won't cover legal fees or anything to compensate for pain and suffering. It's also capped at the death benefit of $370,376, which is the most a surviving family member receives in the event that a COVID vaccine proves to be fatal. But experts specializing in vaccines law say it's difficult to navigate. This government compensation program is very hard to use. The bar for compensation is very high. Also worrisome to some vaccine injury lawyers is the fact that the CICP has rejected a majority of the compensation requests made since the program began 10 years ago. Of the 499 claims filed, the CICP has compensated only 29 claims, totaling more than $6 million. David Carney, a vice president of the Vaccine Bar Association, said the CICP might deny a claim for a variety of reasons. One reason might be the medical records don't support a claim, said Carney, who regularly deals with vaccine injury cases. We have to litigate a lot of really complex issues and provide a medical basis for why the injury occurred. Proving an injury was a direct result of the COVID vaccine could be difficult, according to Carney. It's not as simple as saying, hey, I got a COVID treatment and now I have an injury. There's a lot of burden of proof there. There's also a strict 1-year statute, meaning that all claims have to be filed within 12 months of receiving the vaccine. People harmed by a COVID vaccine deserve to be compensated fast and generously, said Race. The PrEP Act doesn't do that. Lawyers tell CNBC that it would make more sense for COVID vaccine injuries to instead be routed through another program under the HHS Act called the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which handles claims for 16 routine vaccines. Known colloquially as Vaccine Court, the program paid on about 70% of petitions adjudicated by the court from 2006 to 2018. And since it began considering claims in 1988, the VICP has paid approximately $4.4 billion in total compensation. That dwarfs the CICP's roughly $6 million in paid benefits over the life of the program. The VICP also gives you more time to file your claim. You have 3 years from the date of the first symptom to file for compensation. The VICP allows for recovery of pain and suffering, attorney's fees, along with medical expenses and lost wages, if any, said Michael Maxwell, a lawyer who practices in the area of business litigation and personal injury. On the CICP, it's only lost wages and out-of-pocket medical expenses. That's it, unless there's a death. The COVID-19 vaccines, however, aren't on the list of eligible vaccines. Ray said the best fix would be to change VICP's rulebook to add COVID vaccines to its list of COVID inoculations. That would require legislative change. I hope that legislative change happens. So again, to people who say that these vaccines are safe, they're so confident in their safety they made laws to stop you suing them. So anyway, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. I'm going to leave this article in the description. If you want to support this channel, leave my GoFundMe there. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'll leave it there as well. And if you want to buy one of my shirts, I'll leave that link there as well. Peace.